Morning and welcome to the LearnBox Lounge. We're really happy to have you with us today. If it's your first time with us, an extra special welcome. Delighted to have you here. Just to let you know what the LearnBox Lounge is and what it's all about. It's our chance to ensure that you guys have a break from working from home and potentially homeschooling as well. I know myself, it's not easy. So what we thought we'd do right at the start of lockdown, we got together as a team and there were lots of ideas being given. And one of the ones that we thought was a great idea was to have a lounge on a fairly regular basis so that you could come in, sit back, grab a coffee or a drink of your choice and just have some downtime where you could feel motivated and inspired. And we plan to bring you the best speakers we possibly can. So today I'm very pleased to tell you we've got the absolutely wonderful Dean Fox with us. I met Dean Fox in Washington probably about 18 months ago. We had a lot of fun on that trip. It was a trade mission teaching the Americans about apprenticeships, or that's what it was supposed to be about, but we did have a lot of fun. But anyway, what happened in Washington stays there. So yeah, I'm really pleased to have Dean here with us today. He's joining us from sunny Middlesbrough. He is a mindset coach, a speaker and a consultant. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to allow Dean to tell you his amazing story of resilience. And then whilst he's speaking, if you want to send any questions through on the question panel, which is at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A section, if you type any questions in there, obviously we'll get them all together and I'll put those questions to Dean at the end. He said he's very happy to answer those. So yeah, feel free to ask as many questions as you would like to. So without further ado, let's get over to sunny Middlesbrough and say good morning to Dean. Hi, Dean.
Morning, Lucy. Can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. It's really good to see you. I know we caught up yesterday briefly, but yeah, good to see you. And thank you on behalf of all the LearnBox team for joining us today. We really, really do appreciate it. I think it's worth mentioning to people that you are doing this completely free of charge. Just really to help people have a break, but you are a fantastic coach, fantastic speaker. So what we will be doing at the end of this is sharing your details for anybody that wants to get in touch with you on the back of today's session. And I'm sure after hearing your story, there'll be lots of people that do want to do that. But, you know, for doing this for us all and completely free of charge, thank you so much for that. We really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. I really appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. So without further ado, I'm sure people don't want to listen to me for much longer. They're all here to listen to you. So I'll pass you over to hear your story of resilience. And as I mentioned, if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask, feel free to send them through at any stage. And once Dean's gone through his story, I'll put those questions to him. Over to you, Dean.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So yeah, I suppose my story started in about the early 2000s. My background originally was in engineering. Then into sales and business development after that. And I always felt that there was more to life than kind of the 9-to-5 type job. And I was always looking for other opportunities. And so my wife and I decided in the early 2000s that we were going to branch out and do something for ourselves. And we started, again, almost fell into it really. We got involved in property, through basically investment, and then later more latterly into development. And over about 3, 4, 5 years, we built a property investment and development business. And that led us right up to 2008. And at that time, you know, things were going pretty good for us. I'd taken the step out of full-time employment into the business full time, and it was a great time to be in property essentially. And then obviously we hadn't predicted what happened in 2008. We were subject to probably one of certainly the worst financial crisis I'd ever experienced in my lifetime. And I think the thing about it was because it was global, it affected everybody. But it literally was almost like somebody switched off a tap. At the end of the day, and you know, that was it. Our office doors closed and they never opened again, and that cost us a lot financially. We lost our business in the subsequent kind of 12 to 14 months with the various things that went on. We also during that time lost some substantial investments that we'd made in the previous few years when things were going okay. And so we had some tough decisions to make. You know, I'd always been a believer in this idea that if anything was to happen, it was up to us. We were in full control of what we needed to do. So it was our job to get ourselves out of it. And we made some tough decisions. We completely closed the business down. And I'd said that what I would do is, in the short term, I would go back into the corporate world. So I'd get a job that would hopefully see us through a period of time until we could get back on our feet. And so that's what we decided to do. I started to reach out to a few people to see whether or not there were any opportunities in the sales and business development sector that I could take up. And that was our strategy. And then in March of 2010, just a couple of months later, my wife and I were involved in a fairly serious road traffic accident. And my younger son was in the car as well. And at that time, you know, I often say it was a fairly serious road traffic accident. I think it was very serious. And a lot of people, you know, when we talk about car accidents, people have, you know, images of what it could have looked like. But essentially it took the best part of 2 hours to cut us from the vehicle. And the road itself where the accident happened was closed for about five hours. And there were about 6 vehicles involved in it. My younger son, who was in the back, he was airlifted with the air ambulance to the nearest hospital. And what essentially happened after that was, obviously that paid to my plan to be able to go back and get a job. I was unable to drive for a significant period of time, physically unable to work for a period of time too. And what that meant was we had probably in total about 12 months where we were unable to really do anything, to work. And obviously financially that affected us even more. So everything that we had left, we spent. We were bleeding money every month with zero revenue coming in. You know, we had some amazing support from family who really did look after us during that period. But, you know, when we're not part of a family of multimillionaires, that, you know, money doesn't just drop from them when we needed it. And so, you know, it became increasingly more difficult from a financial perspective. And by the middle of that year, you know, I'd made a decision that I had nowhere else to go, no way out. I ended up bankrupt over that period of time personally. But I think the biggest thing, and this is why I talk often about the situation we're in now, the biggest thing was that I found myself in a downward spiral. I couldn't really, I found it really difficult to talk to my wife and my family about what was going on with me personally. And things just got darker and darker during that period. And it kind of culminated in the December of 2010. So I think because, for a couple of reasons, I think it was the lead up to Christmas, and that, you know, I had on my mind that we had a young family at the time, and how were we going to get through that period? You know, what were they going to be thinking about the situation we were in? Plus the kind of the psychological effects of the accident and so forth. And I got to a point 2 weeks before Christmas where I got up one morning and I said to my wife, Christine, that I was going out for a walk. I said I needed some fresh air. I needed to clear my mind. The truth is that I had no intention of going home after I'd gone out that day. I'd made a decision that both the world and my family would be a better place without me. And I went to some woodland near where I live, and I sat in a clearing in the woodland and contemplated ending my life. And I'd like to say that, you know, there was some flash of inspiration and my whole world changed. It didn't really happen like that, but there were a few things that did happen that kind of started me on a different path, a different journey. The first thing was that when I was sat in that clearing and I actually sat and made a decision to say, okay, so today is the last day. This is it. I don't feel like I can go on at all. I felt really, for the first time in probably a good few years at that point, I felt really calm. I didn't feel stressed. I didn't feel afraid of anything. Previously, I'd been hugely angry with everybody, including myself and the world. But I didn't feel any of that at that point. And it was enough of what I would call a quiet, peaceful time. It might have only lasted a few seconds, but it was enough for me to question a couple of things. And the overriding thing that kept coming through was, I could have died several months before in this accident, and I didn't. Why is that? There must be a reason why that didn't happen then. So why am I about to take what most people would term to be, you know, the most precious gift that we have? Why am I about to take my own life now when it didn't go then? What am I here for? Who am I? What's my purpose? And those questions were a bit of enough for me to, if you like, see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And I returned back, I walked back home, and I think I was looking for some inspiration. I was looking for something that would give me a lift in that time to say, you know, there is more to life than this. There is a way out. And so I went into the office that we had at home where we'd worked from, and I took a book from the shelf. And it wasn't by any real determined choice or anything like that. I just went along and I took a book from the shelf that I had a connection to. And the book was a book that my son had bought me the last family holiday we went on before 2008. My son had bought me a book at the airport. I've always read a lot, and he bought me something that he said he thought I would enjoy. And I took that book from the bookshelf. It's a book I have it with me. I carry it everywhere. It's become a thing for me. I have it, and it's a book called Think and Grow Rich. And it really, I couldn't put it down. I'd read the story or the book, the content of the book previously, not in that version, but in a different version. I'd also listened to the audio, but I never really got anything from it, if I'm being honest. But that day, I couldn't put it down. I read it cover to cover. I never stopped. And I made so many notes in it, and I saw so many things in the book that I'd never seen before, that I really started to question that maybe there is more to life than this. Maybe there is some higher purpose for me. Maybe I just don't see it. And you know, if I'm ever gonna get back to where I feel I should be, or where I feel I have the potential to be, then I need to understand why I feel like I do now, and why I've done the things I've done, and why I continue to do certain things. And so I started on a journey that, you know, most people would refer to now as an industry in personal development. I didn't know that's what it was then. I just had a real hunger and thirst to learn more about myself, about how we work, and about how I could use some of the things that other people were using that they'd had success with. And so for the next kind of 10 years plus to date, that's what I did. I kind of invested every spare time that I had, every spare amount of money I had, and I've spent thousands of hours and lots of money on learning as much as I could about who I was really, and how I worked. And during that time, a number of things happened. So I've had the pleasure, and I'm eternally grateful and being blessed to be able to work with some of what I would class to be the most amazing people all over the world, who are, you know, leading people in this type of industry. So, you know, I spent time at events with people like Tony Robbins and Bob Proctor, Les Brown from the US, as well as people from other places around the world. And I invested thousands of hours in reading and learning and studying some of this information. And slowly but surely, some things started to change. But I still always felt like I use this description as if I was running with this parachute attached to me, that it was just slowing me down all the time. Or if I was driving, as if I had a handbrake on the car, it just wouldn't go as fast as I felt it could. I didn't feel like I was living up to my potential. And so I started to try and understand why that was. And so through the stuff I learned, I realized that the biggest impact was when I started to really understand what I call who I really was, in terms of the difference between who I thought I was, the self-image that I developed for myself, who I thought I was and how the world worked, wasn't really true. And I started to unravel how that came about, how I started to believe that in the first place, and then how I could make changes to that. And I'd like to say, again, things happened overnight, but they didn't. It took a number of years for me to really get to grips with something around that. And the biggest thing for me was that everywhere I went and learned from all of these people, the biggest thing they kept telling us was that if you change, they all have different words for it. So, when I was working with somebody like Bob Proctor, he talks about the paradigm, the way we see the world. If you can change your paradigm, if you can change the way you see the world, then everything will change. Robbins talks about changing states. If you can change your state, then everything can change. And all of these people talked about these types of things, but nobody really explained exactly how to do it. They just talked about this idea of, visualization and affirmations and changing your mindset, positive thinking, all of these things, but nobody really give you a roadmap of how to do it. And so I kind of stumbled through trying to find my way through it all. But I suppose the engineer in me kept going back to this idea that, things happen very, very quickly. So why is it that we think that changing something should take forever? That, change in ourselves is either difficult or takes a long time. And so I started to question some of the strategies and say, well, is there not a faster way to do this? Is there something that I'm missing? Is this the only way to do it? Just because somebody has success doing it one way, is that the only way to do things? Maybe there's another way to do it. And those questions kept kind of coming and resonating with me over and over again. And they still do. And I'm not saying that lots of things that people don't provide don't work, because they do. Tony Robbins is one of the most successful coaches in the world, transformed thousands of people's lives. But there are thousands of people that he's worked with that don't change either. And I kept questioning all the time, if this idea of who I think I am isn't true, what's the fastest way to change that? There must be a quick way to do this, a solution. And so that's what I invested the rest of my next kind of 4 or 5 years looking at, was trying to find that solution. And as I started to understand it, things started to change for me in a much faster way. So I developed learned and developed this system that I now use when I'm coaching people. And I really wanted to prove that it worked. It wasn't a case of, well, I'm just going to go out and say to everybody, I think this is the way to do it. I wanted to understand if it worked and how it worked and why it worked. And so I set myself some own goals. I said, right, I'm going to test this on myself. I'm going to set some big changes in my life. I'm going to use this system to see if we can make them work. And that's what we did. We did some really tremendous things, some minor stuff, but some major things as well. I made a complete transition. I doubled my income in 16 weeks, which is a goal I'd set myself for a 12-month period. And we left. I again left the kind of corporate world, set up a new business, and developed that into a six-figure business over a few years. And from that time, I transitioned into what I do now. And the biggest thing for me was, it was never a plan. It was never a strategy for me to say, I'm going to go from being a consultant and working in this environment to coaching and developing other people. It was a case of, I shared some of this information with some people and things started to change in their lives. So, as you would expect, the information, I talk about having a ripple effect. So as I learned some stuff, I shared it with people who were closest to me. So my family and my close friends. And some of those people are my greatest examples of how changing what you think about yourself can completely transform both you, your life, and your business, if that's the way that you want to do it. And there's lots of examples of that. My wife's a good example. My wife's dyslexic, left school with no qualifications, absolutely hated school, but built a successful business of her own over a number of years. But we had a conversation one day when we were talking about what's the biggest dream that you have. And she said, I've got a dream to be an author. And I said, why an author? Where did that come from? And she said, well, I hated reading at school. I hate books because I struggle with that concept. But I absolutely love the idea of people getting something just by reading something, how it can spark their imagination. And I said, okay, so what would it be like if you could become a published author? And we talked about that. And through some work that we did, within a very short space of time, she's now a published author. She wrote a children's book that she uses to help young children be inspired to live a bigger life and follow their dreams. My youngest and eldest son, both through the work that we did, now understand what it's like to follow a dream and have the resilience to be able to take that forward. My eldest son's a professional golf coach in the US, and my youngest son is a pro golfer in the UK. And so from there on in, people started to ask, okay, what is it you're doing, and how are you helping people? And then I realized that everything that I was about was helping people. I really, really wanted people to be able to have, to know the information and to have the changes that they could have in their life that we'd been able to experience in our lives. And that's not because I said that there's anything special about us in any way, shape or form. But I've come to realize, and I think this is affecting lots of people in the current circumstances, I came to realize a few key things. One of them was that in 2008, we lost our business. But during the same period, there were some billion-dollar brands created. Uber, came about during the last financial crisis and is now a billion-dollar brand. And so I started to think, those questions about, well, how is that possible in such a difficult time? How is it possible that somebody can develop such a business? And I realized that it's not about the situation that we're in. The situation can either be an obstacle or it can be an opportunity. And the way that we define that is based on us. It's based on our belief system and the way that we look at that. So we can decide whether it's going to be an obstacle or an opportunity. And in 2008, I decided that it was an obstacle for me. Somebody else saw it as an opportunity. So that was the first real thing that looking back, I really realized. The second thing was that I now understand what the reality of resilience is. People think it's something that we learn. It's inherently inbuilt in us. The problem is that it's veiled by what we think we should be doing, or what the world thinks we should be doing, and who the world thinks we are. And we attach meaning to events that happen to us. So in the current situation, people who are struggling, usually it comes because they attach a meaning to that situation. This means I can't continue with my business, or this means this is going to happen, or this means this is going to lead to this. It doesn't actually have an inherent meaning. And that was something that really, when I learned that really rocked my world in terms of, okay, this gives us an opportunity to take a step back. I was saying when I'm coaching people that, it's very difficult to see the frame if you're in the picture. And, when you're in the situation, it's really difficult to take that step back. But when you understand that the situation is not what causes the emotions and feelings that you have, when you can take that step back, then you can see the frame and you can see the opportunities that exist around it. So that was a second real thing that transformed my life. And the third and final thing was this real understanding of who I am, the ability to be able to say, this is Dean, and you will either like me or you won't, but that doesn't have an impact on me, because some people will resonate with me and some people won't. And being able to go out into the world with that sort of freedom gives you the choice to be able to do whatever you want to do in any way that you want to do it. There are a million ways to skin a cat, and just because somebody's doing it that way doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. And I've learned that. So, in the current climate, there's what I call phases of things that people come and go to. There was a big thing just over recently about, the 4 a.m. club, people saying that, millionaires and billionaires all get up at 4 and 5 a.m. in the morning, and therefore that's what we should do. If that was the case, anybody who got up at 4 a.m. would be a multimillionaire, and that doesn't work like that. So it's not just about the fact that they get up at 4 a.m. that drives that. It's about an understanding of who they are, how things work, how their mind works, and how they can use it to their advantage rather than having it control them, which is what normally happens to us. And that's the summary that brings us up to date in terms of what I do. I spend most of my time now working with business owners, entrepreneurs, people in the commercial world who have got lots of skills. I often say to business owners that they come to me sometimes and we'll have a conversation and they'll say, I'm struggling to do X, Y, and Z, or I'm struggling to take the business from here to here. And one of the things I often say is that So do you know how to take the business from there to there? Because for most business owners, they know how to get more sales, they know how to get more revenue, they know how to get grow their business. They just don't take the action. And my job is to help them find out what's stopping them take the action, because that is the key, I think, to having whatever we want in our lives. And so that's kind of in a short summary. That's about me and my journey to where I am now. And hopefully that's given people an opportunity to see that whatever's going on, there is light at the end of the tunnel. The one thing we can be absolutely certain about is that nothing is forever. It will change at some point. And there's a great saying by a gentleman called Jim Rohn, the late Jim Rohn now, who said that the same wind blows on us all. The arrival point, the destination, is not determined by the blowing of the wind. It's determined by the set of the sail. And it's based on how we set our sail as to where we arrive when the same wind blows on us all.
Thank you, Dean. There's loads of questions come in, but firstly, when you were speaking then, could you see my screen?
Yes, I could.
Right, well, apologies for that. I did get quite emotional actually at the beginning.
That's all right.
Sorry about that. When you talked about your time in the woods,
yeah.
I had a really close friend that died by suicide, and it got me.
Yeah,
wow.
It's
Didn't
a difficult.
know that about you.
Yeah, it's a difficult time, and I often say to people that if I'm doing an interview or I'm speaking, people will say, "Is it okay to ask you about it?" 6-7 years ago, I'd have probably said, "No, I don't want to talk about it." But I think it's important that people understand some of the things that we go through, and it's like I said, I understand how people say it's really difficult to talk about these things. I found it immensely difficult to talk about it, before and after.
Yeah.
But hopefully by sharing it, if people are in that space, that, they get to a point where they can at least say, well, maybe I should reach out to somebody and have at least some conversation about if there is some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And I think there's such a suicide stigma as well. So I think talking about it is good, and it helps people, definitely. It's something that as a team, we're working on something behind the scenes at the moment around that. So yeah, it's something that's really close to my heart, and I'm really pleased that you're still here with us, Dean.
Thank you.
At least because we got to hear your story this morning, that I had no idea all the things that were in that story. So firstly, thanks for sharing and for being so honest with us. But I'll head to the questions. Somebody just left a comment to say your story's so inspiring, and I'll second that. Okay, hi Dean, having experienced the lows you've gone through and come out the other side, what would you say to people who are stressed and feeling anxiety during the crisis?
So I think, the first thing is that I did a video about this recently, actually, in one of my groups, which is that the question I often ask people when they say, in the current situation, I'm feeling really stressed and anxious. I ask people a question, which is, if you're feeling stressed and anxious now, have you ever felt stressed and anxious at any other time in your life? And if the answer to that is yes, then it's not the current situation that's causing your stress and anxiety. And I know that sounds a bit flippant to people because they go, well, yeah, but it is. It's just that that's the way it feels. The way that our mind works, the way that we think, it's our thinking that causes the problem. So it's not the actual situation we're in. It's not the fact that we're locked down that's causing us stress and anxiety. It's all our thoughts about what that means to us. The fact that, okay, that could have an impact on my business, and that could mean this. And I talk about getting into what I talk about catastrophe thinking, because it's very easy for us to go from we're in lockdown to, oh my God, my business is gone, and that can have an impact on my financial status. That might affect my family. And before long, we're in this real difficult, dark situation because we've gone through this process. And so the biggest thing for me is two things. My advice is, first of all, just take a deep breath and have a step back. So you can do that physically, but certainly psychologically, just take a step back from where it is. Think about the fact, have I ever felt these emotions or feelings before outside of this current situation? Because if I have, it cannot be the current situation that's leading to those. And therefore, the ability to be able to see that thinking allows you to take a step back, because ultimately the problem is that we end up believing that that's who we are. We end up thinking that we are our thoughts, and we believe that to be true. Once we can take a step back and be aware of those thoughts, we can realize that, well, if I'm aware of them, I can't be them.
Yeah.
And therefore their impact is less. The power immediately starts to reduce, and it gives people an opportunity to take that metaphorical breath and see things differently. by changing the way they're looking at something.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's about, looking back at how far you've come, and it's something that I do on a regular basis as a parent. So, for example, with my daughter, she doesn't really like that. She has like a fear of water when it comes to swimming, but she also had the same fear when she was riding a bike for the first time, and now she can do that. So it's bringing her back to that moment. You used to say you couldn't do that, but you did it. So now, and I think we all need to do that all the time, really. It doesn't change, does it, throughout your life?
No, absolutely. And that's that thing about, this idea that if I'm afraid of something, people think that fear is telling them that there's something bad about to happen. But it isn't. It's an emotional response. That's all it is. It doesn't actually tell you anything. We think it's telling us something, and therefore our thoughts go to either the future or the past. We either say, I've done this before and I didn't like it then, or we say, I don't want to do this because this might happen in the future.
Yeah.
We're never in the moment. And when we are, we never feel those things.
Yeah. So the best thing to do is put yourself in the worst situation possible, put yourself as far out of your comfort zone, and then you can get through anything.
And essentially, the more that you realize that it's not the thing, whatever that is, the event, the situation, the problem, the person, it's not that's causing the issue. That's not what's causing the emotions. It allows you to take that step. It allows you to say, well, that's not what's causing it. So what is?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Right. There's still lots of questions, so I'll stop butting in. Okay. First one. What would you identify success as?
Okay, this is a great question. And I use it over the years. I've sought for lots of different things, but I now use a definition that I came across from a guy called Earl Nightingale. And it's the best definition of success I've ever found. And his definition of success is that success is the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And the reason I like it so much is that most people define success as an end point, a destination. I'll be successful when I have. Yeah. What I call finish line mentality. But actually, success is the journey. It's the progressive realization. So I say to people when they say, how do you define someone who's successful? I say, if they're doing something that they've decided they're going to do. So it was a firm decision, whether that's be a school teacher, whether that's run a business, whether that's be an athlete, whatever it is. If you've made a decision to do that and you're progressively working towards it, then you are successful. Yeah, definitely. And sometimes people have that final goal, and when they get there, that's when they struggle because they think they've got to the point they wanted to get at and they haven't got anything following up from that. Yeah. I work with entrepreneurs, business owners in probably two categories if I split them up. One is those who are growing a business and have got to a point where they know they're capable of something, they know the steps to take, but they're procrastinating, they're putting off doing what they know they should do. Yeah. And I work with that category. Or I work with the category of what people would term to be successful business owners, those who've got the car, the life, the home, the family, the holidays, but don't feel fulfilled and they can't work out why. They've hit the finish line, as you said, but they don't understand why. Yeah. Okay. Another question, and I think I know what your answer to this will be. Do you believe things happen for a reason? 100%. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Quick answer. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Okay. Right, somebody's asked about your wife's book. I can actually let people know that I purchased this book for my daughter. Absolutely beautiful book, beautifully written, beautifully illustrated with a beautiful message within it. So what we'll do is we'll send out the title of the book as well. But if you want to let people know what that is, and I'm sure it's on Amazon and places like that. Yeah, it's on Amazon. Yeah, you can get it from her website as well. It's called Frickle and the Golden Locket. Yeah, a beautiful book, and my daughter really enjoyed reading it. So thank you again to your wife. That's all right. You're welcome. Thank you for that. What are your goals for the next 5-10 years? So it's a good question, that, and it's an interesting question from two perspectives. One is that one of the things that I learned from the book Think and Grow Rich was this idea of having what he calls a definite chief aim, a major purpose, a number one thing above everything else that you want to achieve, and everything else falls in line with that goal. And so I suppose every 5 to 10 years, I have a 5 to 10 year goal, something that I really want to do above everything else. And the other thing that I learned from the book was that he talks about having a trigger for that. So becoming emotionally connected to that vision and creating a way to remind yourself regularly what that is. And so I have a business-sized, in fact, I have a business-sized card. It's a bit
I thought you
tatty.
were going to do some magic then,
It's a
Dee.
bit tatty now, but it just looks like a business card. It's in like a plastic wallet, and it's been in my pocket. I carry it every day. It's been there for the last 3 years of my 5 years.
Wow.
And it has written on it what my purpose is, and I use it. I used to use it so that I carry it with me so that I could take it out and read it regularly, and it just kind of reminds me where I'm going and what I'm doing. I now don't need to do that, but I do have it all the time, and knowing it's there continually reminds me of where I'm going and what I'm doing. So that's the first part of that question. The second bit is, what's my goal? Is that I have an ambition to have impacted 100,000 people
Wow.
through a ripple effect of this information. So, you know, I don't need to be working with them all myself, but I want to have 100,000 people have been impacted by the information that we share in some way. And that's why I love to do this sort of thing, because I can help share the message wider.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure you've shared it with a few more today, so thanks for that. Somebody has asked about Tony Robbins. I'm a big Tony Robbins fan as well. Tony Robbins is huge in the USA. Did you learn anything from him when you met him? And I am slightly jealous that you've met him.
I learned lots of things from Tony, as lots of people do. You know, he's the biggest thing was this idea. I think that we think, the way that we think is what causes our problems. So Tony has a saying that nobody lacks. It's not a lack of resources that causes our problems. It's a lack of resourcefulness. And that, you know, in the same way I talk about opportunities and obstacles, it's the same idea. You know, in this world we have right now, with technology and the way we are connected globally, there is so many more resources than we've ever had available before. And yet people will still find a way to say, I can't do this because of. And so one of the things that I learned from Tony, which I used to use a lot, was a switch between two questions, adding a word. So often when we want to do something, we ask ourselves a question, which is, can I do? So can I launch a new business? Can I make this amount of money? One of the things that Tony taught was, let's stop saying can I, because you automatically come from a position of I can't. Asking the question can I means I'm starting from the fact that I don't believe I can. So I'm asking can I, is it possible? If we add a word to that question and we just change it to how can I, the assumption is we already can. We come from a point of view of it's possible to start with, I just don't know how. And that's a huge shift in the way that you see things when you ask yourself, how can I do this, as opposed to can I do it? And that was one of the biggest things that I learned from my time through working with Tony and looking at and going to some of his events. You know, there's lots of other things, but there's some things that stick with you. That was one of the things that really stuck with me, is just changing the way I look at something.
Like that.
And that was one of the biggest things I've learned.
Okay, there's still quite a few more questions, so let's see if we can get some snappy answers to these next couple. You've got a great outlook and attitude. What would you say is your life motto?
That's a good question. Someone asked me what my favourite quote was the other day. I suppose it's similar, but it's really tough to define. Okay, so I think probably one of the things I say the most often is it's actually a line from a film. So it's a Johnny Depp line from Pirates of the Caribbean, which is a bit weird, but it's really interesting, because he says that the problem is not the problem.
The problem is not the problem.
The problem is your attitude to the problem. And that's the same for everything. And I've kind of lived by that, is that every time I come up with something and think, well, you know, this is a problem. No, that's not the problem. The problem is the way I look at the problem. And if I change the way I look at it, the problem changes. Yeah,
I like that. Sounds a little bit different to Johnny Depp with a Geordie accent, but I like it all the same. Another quickfire question, which is coming from Christine. And I think this is Christine Edwards, who's also a big Tony Robbins fan. What are you reading at the moment?
So I'm reading a book. So my last 2 years, I've spent. I use the word. I don't use the word often because it has connotations for certain people. But I've spent probably the last 2 years in a more studying a more spiritual aspect of the way the mind works and who we really are. So I've been reading over the last 2 years books by two guys, one by a Jamaican-born Londoner who now lives in India called Muji Baba. I reading a couple of his books, but also the stuff I'm doing the most. So I'm reading, and I'm also doing some audio and studying with a guy called Rupert Spira. And I'm reading his book at the minute, which is about peace, essentially, about finding your true self.
Wow, that sounds good.
Which has been pretty amazing.
Okay, I've noted that down. Thanks for that, Dean. Okay, when people are saying they're stressed now in the current situation, and they've made a point that they're not downplaying the horrible situation, but most people are just being asked to stay at home. So thinking back to like the World War II times, do you think people's ability to be resilient has diminished over the years? And if so, why? Social expectations? What do you think?
Like I said earlier, I don't think resilience has diminished. I think that resilience is inherently built in everybody. I think it's veiled by, our conditioning. So I think, over the last, few decades, I think what's happened to us is that our conditioning has changed. We're conditioned three ways: socially, environmentally, and genetically. And the social and environmental conditioning we're getting has kind of changed more so over the last few years. And so with the advent of social media and things like that, that's why our determination of success has drastically changed as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're less resilient. I just think that our conditioning, the way that what's socially acceptable and the way that other people view the world has changed dramatically. And we're a much more connected world. So, back in those days, we were more isolated, essentially. What was happening to us, we could only see what was happening to us around the world. We're now inundated with information from all over the world. And I think that's had an impact as well. I don't think it changes our resilience. I just think it becomes veiled by everything else that's going on.
So different circumstance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is a good question. What would you say to your 20-year-old self now after all of your life experiences? Oh, if only we could all go back to our 20-year-old self.
It's interesting though, because somebody asked me a similar question in a slightly different way the other day, which was, if you could go back to being 20, what would you change in your life? And I said earlier that I think everything happens for a reason. So my answer is I wouldn't change anything. The one thing I would tell my 20-year-old self is whatever happens is supposed to happen. You will end up in the destination you're supposed to end up. Yeah. And that, that's as much information as I would want to give. I wouldn't want to change.
Yeah. Okay.
The duration, you Back to the Future style. I wouldn't want to have an impact on the things that happened.
Yeah.
But I would want myself to know that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, because I suppose the journey makes you who you are. I think for me, I completely agree. I think the only thing that I would change, I probably wouldn't be as mean to my second brother, as in my the one that comes after me, who I was a bit mean to him growing up. So yeah, that's probably the only thing I would change. Okay. Would you say that you are spiritual?
Yes, and I wouldn't have said that a few years ago, because I think that it's just the word. I think that people have a very specific brings up very specific connotations when people talk about spirituality. So am I religious? The answer is probably no, not so much, but I am spiritual, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you for that. Have you got any advice for people during lockdown to keep positive and retain their standard of good mental health?
So one of the top things that I talk about often is this idea that we're all, and this is one of the things that I kind of disagree, or I separate myself from in terms of the personal development world. Everyone's talking about positive thinking. How can we think more positively? Having studied this stuff for 10 years and tried all sorts of things, there is no way to think more positively. There's no difference between thoughts. They're not positive thoughts or negative thoughts. They're just thoughts. And all that happens is our interpretation and identification with those thoughts is what causes our problems. So the average human has 60 to 90,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
60,000 to 90,000 thoughts a day is what the average human has. Now, most people couldn't tell you more than maybe a dozen of those. So if we had control to be able to think more positively, then we wouldn't need as many thoughts. but we don't have control. They just arise. We can't tell what we're going to think next, and we can't tell you what we thought an hour ago.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is identification with thoughts. So I have this description where I say to people, if you imagine thoughts as clouds in the sky, they continue to pass all day.
Yeah.
It would be ridiculous to give one cloud more meaning than another cloud.
Yeah.
Yet we do that with our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what causes people's problems. So in situations like this, the biggest advice I can give people is to take that metaphorical step away from your thinking. Thoughts will come and go. Emotions come and go. They're transient. They cannot therefore be who you are, because if they did, part of you would go when they went.
Mm-hmm.
When that feeling changed, part of you would be different, and it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not those thoughts that cause our problem. It's our identification with them. And if we can let them pass, and they will,
mm-hmm.
then we will feel calmer, but we will also be exposed to a different perspective of the situation.
Thanks, Steve. What advice would you give on being afraid of change? And I think a lot of people say they're not afraid of change, but people do really try and avoid change, don't they? So unless they're forced into a situation like they are now, and then they have to change.
Yeah.
So yeah, what advice would you give?
So things like that are inherent beliefs. So we've developed our belief system from ages 0 to about 5, 6, or 7 years old, depending on which scientist you study with. But it's a fact that's when our conditioning creates who we think we are, our belief system and our self-image. So being afraid of something is a conditioned response.
Mm-hmm.
And they can change. So one of the biggest things is people say that changing beliefs is difficult and takes a long time, or change is difficult and takes a long time. That's just a belief. And if you don't think you can change beliefs quickly and instantly, and it shouldn't take a long time without years of therapy, if you don't think that's true, think back to when you believed that your Christmas presents were delivered down the chimney by Santa Claus. And think about when that belief changed. Did you go through years of therapy in order to change that, or did it just change like that?
Personally, quite a lot of therapy, to be honest. I was devastated.
Still.
You just ruined my life there, Dee.
Just shattered some people's dreams.
Yeah, thanks.
But I use that as an example because it's true that things can change really rapidly. And so if you have a fear of change,
mm-hmm.
the one thing you can be absolutely certain of is that things will change.
Definitely, yeah.
So we can never be the same. People are afraid of uncertainty, and I read a great quote the other day that said, people shouldn't be afraid of uncertainty, because the only time when anything is possible is when we have uncertainty. Because if it was certain, we would only have one possibility.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, it's interesting. Yeah, and obviously some people do deal with change better than others. So a lot of that is potentially related back to when they were very young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, come on to the final question. What do you do to connect with your intuition?
Okay, so this is a good question, because people have an understanding, a perception of what they think intuition is.
Yeah.
And they will talk about this inner voice and things like that. I think the biggest thing for me is that we all are connected to it at all times. I think the better question is not how do we connect to it, but how do we actually listen to it? Because the number of times in my past, me included, my intuition has told me things and said, I don't think this is a good idea, Dean.
Mm.
I'd be careful with that. And I've completely ignored it and gone on and done it anyway. Said, no, it'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then I've looked back and gone, I should have listened. I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's not really whether or not we connect to our intuition. For me, it's whether or not we listen to it, because most people don't. We ignore it, even when it's really strong sometimes. Sometimes it's a whisper, but sometimes it can be really loud. It can be screaming at you and you still ignore it.
Yeah. And sometimes there's a level of risk with things, but it's worth taking that risk. So it's finding a balance, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Especially when you're running a business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but you would say, trust your intuition.
Trust it. If it's the one thing to be careful of with intuition is, I think there's a difference between our emotions and intuition.
Yeah.
So sometimes we can think we're going to do something, so we can ask ourselves a question, and we can say, I haven't got a good feeling about that. But that might be down to a belief system. It might be a fear. It might be, as opposed to our intuition saying, no, I definitely don't think that's a good idea. There's a technique that's used by some people called grounding, where what they will actually do is they will stand up straight, close their eyes, and ask themselves a question. So in other words, they will say, show me physically what yes is, and their body will move in a direction. And then they will say, okay, now show me what no is, and their body will move usually in the opposite direction. It's just a subconscious reaction to the words. And then they'll ask themselves the question. In other words, should I do this or should I be doing? And their body will move in the direction. That's probably a better test of the truth behind what's happening, as opposed to just an emotional reaction to it.
Yeah, because I suppose it can be tough to sometimes read the lines between intuition and limiting beliefs.
Yes, often. Yeah, really difficult.
Yeah, okay. Right, thank you for that. Somebody's put a note to say, thanks for doing this session, Dean, very inspirational, and I couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
Just for everybody listening, to let them know that we will send a recording link to everybody. And somebody's just said, body testing organic is amazing. Thank you, Dean and Lucy. Thank you. That's from Christine. Thank you, Christine. So we will be sending the recording link out to everybody if you want to listen to this again. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody to say we've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great to hear your story, Dean, and thank you so much for your time answering the questions. I've written loads of stuff down. There'll be some books I'll be purchasing on the back of this, and definitely some things I'll be looking into more. So yeah, be warned, I might be getting in touch with you in the next few days to ask you some more questions on that. But yeah, thank you on behalf of the LearnBox team. Thanks to everybody for joining us, and thank you, Dean, once again for your time.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. I'm always grateful to be able to share some stuff. So thank you.
No, it's been really inspiring. So thank you very much. Take care, Dee.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.